Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, welcome to Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you got things around the house that you want to get done? Maybe a special project? Check out Canish Construction. Waxahachie, he's a local guy. Chris Holmes, he'll take care of you and let him know DV LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is a lady who's had quite a storied life. She's an author. She's authored so many books, and she's really dug deep into personalities. And I want to introduce to you Miss Marita Littauer. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm great. Good to talk to you, DB.
Good to talk to you. Coming to us from Lubbock, the real Texas, as you told me.
Yeah, real North Texas, up there in the Panhandle.
The real North Texas. But, ma'am, I really appreciate you coming on because there was so much interesting stuff that you've been through and you've seen. And I love having stories of life on this show. So I kind of want to just go ahead and ask you about you and just kind of give a bio on you.
Well, sure. As you mentioned, I am, as you put it, into the personality types. And I grew up with it. When I was just 9 years old, my father created a personality profile that has been in use since then. And I'm 67. So this personality profile has been in use for almost 60 years. Now, of course, we've added something to it. It's been enhanced. It's printed in color. It used to be mimeographed. You're probably too young to even know what that is, but it used to be mimeographed and stapled together. And, it's had many iterations, but the exact personality profile itself has remained the same and been in use. And we sell hundreds of these every single month, both either electronically through our website, thepersonalities.com, or through the paper version that you can get from my website, or honestly better, from Amazon. They'll get it to you quicker and cheaper than I will. So it's available. And we sell a lot of those. So that's been a pivotal part of my life. And you mentioned I've written a bunch of books. I've written 20 books, but I haven't written one in almost 20 years. So imagine if I had continued writing. Who knows? My mother wrote 40 books. And so I came into this topic and the idea of writing, kind of naturally because of my mother. My very first book was for women on color and wardrobe and makeup. And you may not be aware of this, TV, but some of your viewers/listeners may be, that back when I was doing that, when I was in my 20s, I was doing color analysis for women. And then it was kind of like everybody who was interested had already had their colors done, and it faded away, and I had to move on in life. And I had already moved on by then, so that was okay. But it's funny, it's kind of back in vogue now. People are having their colors done. So, but I did that 40 years ago. I was involved in that work, and my work evolved. My mother and I taught seminars throughout the United States for primarily women, but ultimately men started coming too. And on speaking and writing, we help people launch their speaking careers, and hundreds of books were written because of our efforts. I used to run the largest Christian writers conference in the country for a number of years. And we had editors who would come, and they were there looking for authors. And a lot of people got book contracts through that. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then in 2012, my now ex-husband left me. And that was devastating for me because as a Christian speaker whose primary work at that point was on relationships, having my primary relationship fall apart was really devastating. And so I kind of literally crawled into a hole and changed my name and got a job running a nonprofit organization that advocated on behalf of energy and the energy industry. And so I served that for a decade using my speaking and writing skills, but speaking on oil and gas and coal. And I went to all these conferences, and I had a column that I wrote that was published in a lot of newspapers throughout the Southwest and on conservative websites throughout the country. And Then in 2016, when Trump got elected, those numbers don't quite add up. I actually got divorced in 2012, but my ex-husband gave me an ultimatum in what would it have been about 2008, I guess, gave me an ultimatum that if I had to make a choice of my marriage or my business. And of course, I chose my marriage, and he left anyway in 2012. So that's the numbers didn't quite. I was giving you a quick, short version, but
That's fine.
2016, Trump got elected, and I said to my now husband, we got married in 2014 when I moved to Lubbock, and I said to my now husband, you know what I'd really like to do is flip houses. And so I had my education, my way back there, college, I majored in interior design. And so I've spent almost a decade in Lubbock, first flipping houses and then remodeling, working as a remodeling contractor, which is way more fun. It's much more fun to spend other people's money. So then last fall, late October, I realized that my book, my best selling book, the only one that's really still in print of all the books I've written, that I realized this was published in 2000, which makes 2026. That makes this year the 20th anniversary of Wired That Way. And so I've kind of retired from most everything else. And I'm spending this year dedicated to reinvigorating the Wired That Way brand.
When did you figure out, and you probably figured this out early, having your mom dealt with this. When did you figure out that personalities are not just quirks? They're actually something that can change or influence a relationship deeply. When did you figure that out?
Well, this is not a direct answer to your question because, like I said, I kind of grew up with it. But where it really became important for me was when I was starting to work, which was like 15 years old at a fast food restaurant. But if you think about it, prior to when you go to work, if you don't like someone, you don't hang out with them. You don't go to their house, they don't come to your house, you don't play together, and you hang out with people that you like. But when you're in at work is the first time you have to interact with people that you really maybe don't like, but there they are, and you have
Yes.
to work with them. And so for me, that's when the understanding of the personalities really became real. I understood what my personality was because I have one of the really obvious ones to identify. But when I went to work and had to spend time with people that maybe I wouldn't really choose, and I began to see that I could, because I had this depth of knowledge from my upbringing, I could look at this person that I was working with, and I could pretty quickly identify what their personality type was, which was not something my mother taught. So that's one of the things have kind of brought to the body of work is how to identify the personality type of these other people by watching their body language, their mannerisms, their clothing, and how they keep their personal space. And I find that if you know that, you can almost more accurately identify someone's personality type than if you have them take a personality profile. Plus, if you're in a tough relationship with someone, whether it be your spouse, your romantic significant other, someone you're working with, if you're in a tough place with them, it's hard to go to them and say, "Excuse me, would you take this personality profile so I can figure you out?" But it's better if you kind of step back and watch and then use this knowledge to adjust your approach to that person and to then ultimately adjust your expectations and meet their emotional needs.
Marita, do you think that when you were telling me about, whether asking them this personality test or watching them, do you think that it's just one of those things where actions do speak louder than words? Maybe when they're answering a question, they're subjective, they're having to look at themselves versus you seeing them in their environment?
Yes, yes. I mean, I think when you work with someone day in and day out, or you live with them day in and day out, you see them at their best and you see them at their worst. And often those of us who are around those people, we know them better than they know themselves. And I always, when I'm speaking on this topic, I use the example and I say, if you're talking to someone, let's just say at the office water cooler. I mean, maybe it's not really the water cooler, but we're using that figuratively.
Mm.
And we've all been in a conversation like this where one person says to the other person, "Oh, you are so whatever it is." Put in the adjective, organized, funny, whatever that adjective might be, and that person says, "I am not." And everybody around them goes, "Yes, you are." And I mean, we've all been there, whether we're the one who's denying that that's what we're like, or we've all been a part of a conversation like that. So what I use that to kind of demonstrate that we really do often know those people better than they know themselves because of that daily interaction, seeing them at their best, seeing them at their worst. And for a lot of people, there's a lot of baggage tied up in who we think we are. There's what our parents wanted us to be. There's what our teachers wanted us to be, what our bosses wanted us to be, what our spouses want us to be. So a lot of times, by the time someone gets in to be 30, 40 years old, and you want them to take a personality profile, throw in they've been to sales training and Dale Carnegie and a few other things in there, they don't really know who they really are at that point.
Right.
But that doesn't mean their personality has changed. Their personality hasn't changed. How they present themselves may change, but that core inside hasn't changed.
Wow. So what do you think that people in all these years that you've looked at this, obviously you get those moments where no, I'm not, and everybody's yes, you like you said, I've
Yeah.
had those moments. But what do you think is the biggest misconception people get about their personalities when they're looking at them?
Well, I think there's several things. The biggest one though is people will say, "Oh, I don't like that stuff. I had one of those at work, and I don't like that because you put people in a box." That's that's the biggest misconception. And that may be true for the way some other people present the same general material, because I didn't create this, my mother didn't create this. The general concepts are literally thousands of years old, going back to the great Greek thinker Hippocrates. So this is not brand new stuff. And there are other people out there who teach it perhaps with a little bit different twist or a little bit different approach. And perhaps the way they teach the concepts of personality types, you do put people in a box. The way I teach it is this is a starting place. Understanding what your core natural wired that way personality type is, when you understand that, that gives you a starting place. On this paper personality profile that I have in my hand is a whole chart of strengths and weaknesses of each personality type. And once you understand what your personality type is, you then want to work to eliminate those weaknesses and live in your strengths, but also to work to acquire strengths that are not natural to you. For example, my basic personality type is what I call the popular sanguine, represented by the color yellow, and the powerful choleric, represented by the color red. And I'm about 50-50 those two personality types. But the weaknesses of the popular sanguine are that we tend to be late and we're not very scheduled. My husband, who's the perfect melancholy, represented by the color blue, and he's a CPA, which is wonderful for him. He can sit in an office with no windows all day long with a calculator, and he can do that. I couldn't do that. But he likes to say to me, "Marita, dates, times, and numbers are not your friends." And he is correct. But I have had to learn to get organized so that I was here for you today, for example. I have
Yeah,
to,
I'm
I've had
grateful.
to, I've had to learn to get organized. And I've had people say to me, "Marita, you are the most organized person I've met." And yeah, I am fairly organized, but it's not natural to me. I've had to learn to get organized. And even just recently, a week or two ago, I was actually going to a political thing, kind of you and I were talking about. And it was a gathering at someone's house to meet a candidate, one of those kind of things. And I was going to this, and I thought it was at 5:30. And my husband would have come, but he didn't have enough notice, blah, blah, blah. And when I got there, there's no one there. No one at all is there. And I look up on my phone and I look up the flyer for this event, and it was at 6 o'clock. I text my husband and said, "Oh, it's actually at 6 o'clock, not 5:30. There's time for you to come." And he's like, "No, I'm not coming." But I mean, this just happened a week or two ago, and here I am. Dates, times, and numbers are not my friend. I was there, but I was early. But I
Y-
really
y-
had to learn.
Yeah, no, and you were talking about this learn thing. I want to go back real quick because of the title of your book, Wired, and you said wired that way. So
Uh-huh.
personalities are concrete, like from birth, and then you work on them to change them, or
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, basically, and again, when I'm speaking, and I typically speak to women's groups, that's probably not a big surprise that I typically speak to women's groups.
Well,
Ask,
they always want to be smarter than us. They do.
well, they're generally a little more willing to learn, but not always, but generally a little more willing to learn. So I'll ask, how many of you have had more than one child? And almost everybody in the audience raises their hand. And I'll say, how many of you could tell in the womb that child B was different from child A? And they all raise their hand. They're not the same. You could raise them, same parents, same house, same bedroom, even the same clothes, and they come out different. Our personalities are hardwired into us. But as I mentioned earlier, this does not mean it puts you in a box. The goal for us as human beings is to grow and to mature and to kind of, you might say, evolve into someone who is living in our strengths and not in our weaknesses. Any one of these four personality types living in their weaknesses, which many people do live in their weaknesses, they never grow, they never mature. Any one of them living in their weaknesses is not someone you want to hang out with. Any one of them living in their strengths is someone you want to spend time with. And so it's a matter of growth and maturity.
Are the weaknesses just easier to hang? Is it easier to live in your weaknesses? Have you seen that?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, you can just be, you don't have to put any effort in to live in your weaknesses, to be slovenly, to be, or someone who's an introvert, which on the chart, the bottom two, the cool colors, the green and the blue, they're the introverts. The top two are the hot colors, and they're the extroverts, and hot air rises. That's why they're on the top. But it's very easy for someone who's an introvert to just stay home and never do anything and not get out of their shell. That's really easy for them to do that. For those of us who are extroverts, depending on which kind of where our personality is more, it's very easy for us to be loud and outgoing and kind of obnoxious. We've all seen people like that in restaurants that are living there in that loud, outgoing, obnoxious thing. And you kind of want to tell them, we really don't need to hear all this. But it's very easy to live in our weaknesses, but it takes discipline to minimize those weaknesses. They're always still there, but we can minimize them and learn to kind of dial it back. My ex-husband, when we would go out and I would get kind of wound up because I get telling stories and I get, excited and my voice gets loud. And he would
That's
kick
awesome.
me under the table and do this. And I understood
Great.
clearly that meant dial it back, dial it back. You're too wound up. And I do get that
Mhm.
way.
No, I was very extra. I was very extra at one point in life. I think I've calmed down quite a bit, but I think that just came with age. I'm still an extrovert, but I think that there was a shift in my person. I don't think I know there was a shift on my personality after I came back from Iraq. I
Yeah.
was very different in my personality. The guy who went and the guy who came back had very different personalities. Before I get into the different types of personalities and how you broke that down, because there's a lot of language there, sanguine, and
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
nothing about. But before I get into that, you talked about the politics and you were meeting up with a candidate, and that's kind of what I do on my show. I meet with these different candidates and have them on. What have you seen has been the is there a common personality that you run into in an effective politician, or do you see just kind of all work differently?
Well, I mean, let me just mention the fourth one that I haven't mentioned, which is the green. which is the peaceful phlegmatic. This is the background person. This is the person that doesn't have a lot of goals, a lot of drive. They're content. That this person is not usually the politician. That's why I wanted to bring this one in, because they don't really have the drive to get out there and fight and change the world. If you study, my mother wrote a book analyzing presidents' personalities because she loved politics. I got that from mom. And she wrote a book called Personalities in Power, and it ended with Bush, I think. But it went through, I haven't talked about this in ages. I can't remember which president it started with, but it went through, I think, Bush. But she analyzed all their personalities. And when you have this as a tool, it makes it really fun. Because obviously Trump, he is basically the powerful choleric. He goes in where angels fear to tread. And he's a narcissist, but who's going to run for the most powerful job in the world if they're not a narcissist? That they've got to have some of that in there to be that.
A touch of it at least.
Yeah, they got to have some of it. So the majority of them are going to be, if you drew a diagonal line through this graph, they're going to be over here. They're going to have at least some of the powerful choleric. Trump's got a good bit of the popular sanguine. Trump loves to goad those reporters. He loves to poke at them, and he loves to egg them on. He just has great fun doing that. And he throws stuff out there that's total hyperbole. It's rooted in truth, but it's total hyperbole. And the press goes all, ballistic over it. And he just sits back and laughs.
I think, I think he gets a kick. I definitely think he gets a kick out of that, shaking it up a little bit. But that's very New Yorker personality. I think I brought, this is your, is this the one that you've been holding up right here?
Well, it's close. It's got the squares. This one has a little different content on it, but it's the same layout. So that's helpful for people to see.
Now getting into these different personality types, you have the sanguine, the choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholy. All right, let's break them down each. See. Okay. I'm trying to see where I'm closest to.
Okay, I got to give you a little background. Those words that you couldn't pronounce, those are Greek words, and they come from Hippocrates way back thousands of years ago when he first came up with this idea that people were different. And he tried to figure out what made people different. And what he concluded at that time was that we had different fluids running through our body. And so anyone who's listening who has a medical background will know that the word sanguine has to do with blood. And so he believed that person who was the loud, fun-loving, outgoing kind of person had red hot blood coursing through their veins. Now, obviously, he had limited scientific and medical knowledge available, but today we realize he was more right than we thought. Well, it wasn't fluids, it was inborn. It was something in us. Today we know it as DNA, and that's what makes us who we are, where that personality comes from. So those words are the Greek words. Because they're Greek and most people can't say them and they don't mean anything to people, I like to add to it a modern day adjective. So I have the popular sanguine, the powerful choleric, the perfect melancholy, and the peaceful phlegmatic. I also add colors to it to make it easier for people to remember. And I tell people, whether you use the Greek word, the adjective, or the color, or a combination, it doesn't matter, because these labels are just vocabulary that allows us to talk about it. So with that background, I like to start with the popular sanguine, not just because it's who I am, but because the popular sanguine is the most obvious to identify, because we tend to be loud, we tend to be outgoing, we tend to talk with our hands, and especially in children, you'll sometimes hear a mother say about a child, oh, he never met a stranger, or she never met a stranger. That's the popular sanguine. They're talking to the people in the grocery store line with them. They're chatting away. And as adults, we tend to like bright colors And as I said, we tend to have a loud voice and messy personal space. So those are some clues to help you identify the popular sanguine personality. We tend to be, like I said, we're very friendly, never met a stranger, but we also tend to be unscheduled and late. Then I like to
Yes.
go looking at that chart. Can you throw that chart back up again?
Yeah, let me see how to do that again. Technology is getting
Oh, I
harder and
know. Well,
harder
I
to
can use my little
manage, but
paper version here.
no, that's all right, right here. You got it.
Okay. So they're arranged the way they are on the chart. There's a very specific concept here. And from the popular sanguine, I like to go to the perfect melancholy personality, the blue, because they're the opposite. Where it says there on the chart, you can see the popular sanguine is loud and open. The perfect melancholy is quiet and closed. Popular sanguine loves people. Perfect melancholy prefers to solitude. They're energized by solitude. They like charts, graphs, and lists, and they tend to be suspicious of other people. They're perfectionistic. That's hence the term the perfect melancholy. Then I like to go to the powerful choleric personality represented by the color red. And this is the natural boss of life. And I mentioned children that you can tell on the playground sometimes. The powerful choleric is the one that is telling the little friends what to do. And the little friends strangely do it unless they run up against another powerful choleric who pushes back and says, no, we're not going to do it that way. But the powerful choleric is the natural boss of life. They tend to be very focused, and their gestures are like pointing, wagging their finger. They're not just like talking like I do. They're very specific gestures. They're the natural born leader, and they're goal oriented. The opposite of that person is the peaceful phlegmatic represented by the color green, and that is the natural background person of life. They're the ones that if you say to them, would you like coffee or tea? They'll say, oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter, whichever is easiest. And it is true that they don't care. It's whatever is easiest. And so that's the peaceful phlegmatic. They're very comfortable to be around, and they dress comfortably as well. So you can kind of see some of the things that are there for those four personalities, and realize basically, and I've kind of indicated this, but I haven't said it point blank, that none of us are 100% exactly one personality type.
No.
I like to use
I'm
a
kind of
color
living
wheel.
I'm kind of living in that in between that yellow and green. I live my life, ever since I came back to Jesus about 8, 9 years ago. He told me I needed to be kind. So I live a life of trying to be kind. And my wife says, you could just talk to anybody. You just,
Huh?
you can make a friend just out of nowhere. And,
Yeah,
um,
there you are. That
and,
would be,
and yes, but I'm also not as now I value peace very much, and I'm very comfortable where I'm at, and I'm looking forward to retirement. My goals are more like, getting out and seeing the parts of the world that I haven't seen. And I enjoy being background. It's kind of a weird in the middle of that.
yeah, no, that's so the blends. Let me just tell you, since you're talking about that, the combination that you're talking about, that the person who has those two, the yellow and the green together, the yellow is outgoing, the green is introvert. And usually you can tell which one is your higher percentage based on, are you introverted or are you more extroverted? But those two together make what I like to call everyone's favorite person. This is a really likable person because the phlegmatic part of you, the green, doesn't push. You're easy to get along with, but the popular sanguine, the yellow, means yeah, you're fun, you like people, you're willing to get out and go do stuff. You're probably not going to organize it, but if someone says, "Hey, let's go do this," you're going to be game to go and do this. So that combination is, I like to say, everyone's favorite person. Now, the reverse of that, the powerful choleric red and the perfect melancholy blue, I call this corporate America's favorite person, because this is the natural workaholic, the powerful choleric, that strong, goal oriented, driven, But the perfect melancholy, the really organized, detailed conscious. And this is the person who can very easily become a workaholic. And while you said you're looking forward to retirement, this other person, they dread retirement because the last thing in the world they want to do is have nothing to do. This is a person who likes to work and likes to be going. And the
Mm.
top two, which is what I am, that means both parts of me are the extrovert. So I tend to be kind of turbocharged. I don't do nothing well. That doesn't mean there's nothing I don't do well. I don't just sit and rest well. I don't do nothing well because I'm go, go, go. Now, my husband's the bottom two, the green and the blue, the peaceful phlegmatic and the perfect melancholy. And he can spend an entire weekend sitting in his recliner in the garage. That's where his man cave is. He can sit, and he does have a recliner there, and he can sit in the
Yeah.
garage and watch sports for an entire weekend. And I'm not criticizing that at all. I just, it's not,
Yeah.
I don't get it, but he can do that all weekend and he's content.
Yeah. No, and you know, I've been known when it comes to football. I love my Niners, and I'm gonna be watching. I'm gonna be watching the screen when they're on. But what are the negative parts of each of these that you've seen when it comes to, let's say, relationships between wife and husband? Where have you seen in a marriage where what are the negative parts of these?
Well, we tend to marry someone who's opposite from us. And I've done this twice. I'm popular, sanguine, powerful, choleric, and I've married a melancholy twice. And the melancholy, I mean, we just tend to marry someone who's opposite from us. I believe that God designed us that way because where he is strong, I'm weak. Where I'm strong, he's weak. And so I believe that God designed us that when we come together, we bring a full complement of skills to the table. But if you don't understand this, it becomes attack. Instead of attract, it becomes attack. We were originally attracted to one another for the strengths that that person had that we realize we don't have. My husband one day recently said to me, if it wasn't for you, I would probably never get out of the house. And it is true. He would be content to just stay in and all the time. Few weeks back, I told him something that I was going to go do, and he said, "Do we have to have something every single night?" I said, "No, no, you're not going. I'm going to this. I know you don't want to go. And besides, we haven't been home for the last 4 nights." But to him, it's like, do we have to have something every single night? And so, see, that can be, if you don't understand each other, that can be a real drag because I want to go when he wants to say no. And so those opposites can be very difficult. And the powerful choleric with the peaceful phlegmatic, you have the same kinds of issues. The powerful choleric wants to go, 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 and the peaceful phlegmatic is saying no, no, no. And I had one time when I was speaking, a woman came up to me and she was clearly powerful, the powerful choleric. She came up to the stage where I was like, her feet were stomping on the ground, and she comes up and she's kind of got this kind of look on her face, and those are all dead giveaways. And she says to me, "So, if I understand you right, you said the peaceful phlegmatic needs respect and a feeling of self-worth." And I said, "Yes, that's right." And she puts her hands on her hips and she says, "Well, what I want to know is how do I respect him when he doesn't do anything?" Well, right there's the problem because to her, respect is earned by doing. You're not respected because you're a quality person, that you're kind, you're loving, you're considerate. To her, and as a powerful choleric, respect is earned by doing. And to her mind, her husband, and he may not even realize it, but he's in a production deficit and she's expecting him to do. And if you don't understand these concepts, I don't know how many marriage stays together truly, especially because we do tend to marry someone who's opposite from us.
Yeah, no, I can see that being an issue if that's a person that needs actions and actions and actions and actions with somebody who really does not function that way. When it comes to, have you seen chameleons in this? Like in your studies and looking at this and being part of this, have you
Yes.
seen people be chameleons in trying to do this,
And
but you knew damn well wasn't that?
that is generally the peaceful phlegmatic, the green, and that often makes them harder to identify because their personality type, while it is hardwired, it's not so big, it's not so obvious. And they're as intelligent human beings, a peaceful phlegmatic in a workplace, let's say, is very well liked. Everybody likes them. And so it's time for them to get a promotion because they've been there X amount of time and it's time to get a promotion. And they get sent to management training. They get sent to sales training. They get sent to different trainings. And as an intelligent human being, that person can more easily function in a different role. They can function in a leadership role more easily than I can be quiet. And so they can take on traits that are not natural to them. But the thing that happens, and that sometimes that's when I talked about identifying the different personality types. I identify the peaceful phlegmatic last because they're the least obvious to identify. And so often, truly the best way to identify their personality is by process of elimination. And a lot of that is because of that chameleon characteristic that they can take on this trait, they can take on this trait. But at the end of the day, assuming this is in the workplace, at the end of the day, they're exhausted because all day long they're having to put forth and put out and be someone that they are not naturally. And so when they get home at the end of the day, that peaceful phlegmatic truly needs 30 minutes in the recliner because they're exhausted. They've been functioning outside of their natural skill set all day long, managing people, whatever they're doing, and that's definitely where the chameleon comes in. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. That I think that at some point in my life, I've done that and been exhausted because it wasn't me. That was a pretty good analyzing there. Now, when it comes to parenting and family, because I've had you longer than normally I go, but man, I'm having so much fun here. That when it
I didn't
comes
even
to
know how long we're just here
well,
for.
normally I go about 30 minutes, but man, I'm enjoying this. When it comes to parents and parenting, because we haven't covered that one, how can parents damage their child emotionally simply by not understanding this
Oh,
personality types?
very, very much so. And let me mention that in my book, Wired That Way, I do have a chapter on marriage and I do have a chapter on parenting. But let me tell you a quick story. And this is a true story. It's a friend of mine. And when she was a little girl, she grew up her father was a pastor in a very strict religious, Christian faith. Okay. Very strict. And he was the pastor. And she was a little sanguine girl and she liked to wiggle and play and color, and all of that. But the popular sanguine, one of the things that is hardwired into us is the need, and it's on that chart, I believe, is the need for attention and approval. So we, as a popular sanguine, we want mom and dad to love us, pat us, kiss us, tell us that we're wonderful. So this
Mhm.
friend of mine learned early on as a child that the only way dad would tell her she was a good girl was if she sat in the front row at church and was a good girl and she didn't wiggle and she didn't color and she didn't hit her sister and all of that. She told me when she took the personality profile, she came out sanguine and melancholy. And she had an internal battle, a struggle as an adult because her father gave her this certain conditioning. She told me that she remembers one day going home from church, and this is, before even before seatbelts, when cars had big bench seats in the back. And she and her sister were kind of horsing around, hitting each other in the back of the car. And her father turned around and wagged his finger at her and said to her, "There is no place in the Christian life for frivolity." So now, as a little girl, subconsciously, this is not out front, but subconsciously, she realized is the only way dad will like me is if I behave in a different way. And then she finds out that who she is naturally is not okay with God. So when I meet this person as an adult, she's very conflicted inside as to, she's got real perfectionistic tendencies that she struggles with because she's trying to prove to dad that she's a good girl, even though she's now at this time that this happened probably 40. And so very much parents, if they don't understand who their kids are, they try to push them, or very often try to push them into a set mold of what mom or dad thinks is the right thing to be, or whatever their faith may dictate. And rather than encouraging that child with their natural strengths.
Wow. And wow, that's big. Now, when I think about, because you don't have to be a psychologist to see this, even in my kids, these kids nowadays are anxiety ridden. They have a lot of, and I know Gen X and generations before me had our issues, but this generation seems to be really anxiety ridden, really just stuck in these different types of emotions that are really affecting them. And I wonder, because I'm sitting here watching this and I'm soaking this in. I wonder, is it because they're trying to live a personality that they're not, more so than anything else, that they're trying to live up to something. So it was
Well,
interesting that
I
you brought
think
it up.
there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, obviously, the kids that grew up in crazy COVID world and things like that, there are some really different forces on kids today that were probably not in our generation.
Right.
That they're dealing with some tough stuff. But yeah, there's not a sense of that being that individual.
Well, I could talk to you all night, but I got to kind of wrap it up. What do you here? I have some rapid ones that I had written down.
Okay.
Uh, let's see. Well, no, you've already answered that one. What personality is most likely to do ghost text?
To do what?
Ghost text.
Ghost text?
Yeah, like ghost somebody. Which one would
Oh,
you say? Yeah.
I've never been asked this before, but I would assume that, see, I think the reason you ghost somebody is because you want to avoid conflict. And on the
Right.
chart, the yellow and the green, oops, yellow and the green, no, where am I? There I am. The yellow and the green are the ones that want to avoid conflict. And
Right.
so, because the especially the red, the powerful color is much more confrontational. And they're going to just tell you like it is, and tell you to take a hike or whatever. Where the ones who want to avoid confrontational would be the ones who are more likely to ghost you. But I've never been asked that question.
Well, you know what? It's good that I came up with one that
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
little
it's
bit
good. I
different. I
like it.
was looked at. So thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. There's just so much that I was taking in, just evaluating me as you were talking about
Of
it.
course.
But can you stick around after the show real quick?
Sure, I can real quick. Yep.
Thank you.